So the last section of this lecture is on lean software and Kanban principles. I don't think of these as full processes for Agile software development, but they are definitely inspired by the Agile manifesto and some things that we've learned from Agile processes. They're kind of Agile-ish, for lack of a better word. Lean software, the idea behind it is to focus on these 7 principles regardless of what process you're using. You want to eliminate waste, right? Make sure that what you're doing is actually going to be useful. Amplify learning for the team, making sure that whatever process you have, you're taking advantage of all of the learning opportunities in development as possible. And then 3 and 4 go together. You want to decide as late as possible. If something is a decision and you feel like you have the right answer, but you could wait anyhow, then wait, because things might change, requirements certainly change all the time, and stakeholder opinions change all the time. So why decide now when you can decide later? In addition to that, you want to deliver as fast as possible. That is not to say that you have to have like short iteration cycles or that you have to have the customer involved in each of these things, but the deadline, the notion of producing a thing in a condensed time frame is itself a driver of good process, and it helps you identify what's wasteful and what's not as well. Empowering the team so that they can make decisions using their own common sense and their own background. You may not be able to produce the same sort of transparency in your process that you have in Scrum, but you can be aware of the problem that is caused by keeping the team in the dark and not giving them the autonomy to make decisions on their own, regardless of which process you're using. So empower the team. Building quality into the product at every single step, meaning not having a separate phase that is just for quality assurance. Another thing that you can do regardless of which process you're interested in. And then this last one, see the whole, which I think of as like avoiding decomposition drift. Essentially, as you decompose a singular entity into its constituent parts, or the parts that you have decided are its constituent parts, it's very possible that those layers of abstraction that make it something you could actually implement in individual pieces somehow lose the holistic goal that you had at the very beginning, right? So make sure in whatever process you have that you are not subject to that you have a way to refer back to the bigger picture at every single decomposition step or at every single abstraction. So this is the idea behind lean software. I think it's been kind of popular for a while. I don't think it's something that we'll see end up inspiring its own completely separate software development mechanism. But it's a nice way to, if you cannot use Agile, if you're stuck in some kind of an iterative approach, to get some of the benefits of Agile by incorporating these principles. Kanban, on the other hand, is more like a project management approach. Software development doesn't occur in a vacuum, and you're going to be joining an organization with a history, and that history somehow is going to determine most of what you end up doing, most of what the process currently looks like, whether that's intentional, unintentional, or not. This is especially true in organizations that have acquired other companies. Like if you were joining a large Fortune 500 company and the group that you're working in inside that company was previously a separate startup with its own culture and history, that's a very important piece of the way their current process works. And project management or program management principles that help you move from the current state of wherever you're at, including these complicated historical legacy process issues, to a new process in a way that avoids the curve that we talked about very early on, where people start abandoning process change, is really important, right? You want to make sure that you're making incremental change so that you are not in a position where you see massive declines in productivity and then you give up changing altogether and you go back to the old process. So Kanban is an approach to doing that. I don't think there's a really, really good book on Kanban yet, nothing that I would think of as like a definitive introduction to it. So I'm just going to give you these 4 Kanban principles that you can then think about and adapt at your leisure. First, you have to start with the existing process. It's about changing from the current process to the new process, not abandoning the current process and then bringing everyone up to speed on the new process. You also need to agree that everybody on the team is going to be pursuing incremental evolutionary changes to get to a better place, right? Because sweeping changes are risky. You may end up having that failure curve. You may see huge productivity declines that people are going to want to avoid. You may actually have people in the organization that are worried about being blamed for changes. Again, this is very well described in Tracy Kidder's Soul of a New Machine. And so because of all of these things, you want to make sure that whatever change you're pursuing, it will be seen as like an evolutionary step rather than a giant leap. Third, you want to respect the current process, the current roles, the current responsibilities, and the current titles. Most of the people in an organization are very attached to where they're at, right? Otherwise, they would have left the organization in most cases. That's not everyone, but most people are going to be attached to where they're at. And they're going to be afraid that change is going to take what they have and change it into something they don't like, right? This is known as loss aversion. And even if it's unlikely, we're so wired to avoid loss aversion or to not want loss that we will sometimes not take the steps that are necessary to find something better, right? To get something better. So we have to have a profound respect for the current process, the current roles, responsibilities, and titles as a result. And then finally, you need to have leadership at every single level of your organization. Everyone has to have a responsibility, and they have to have the autonomy to recognize when whatever process change is happening is failing within your responsibility, and then to adapt to it, right? Common sense actually has to be common in order for these incremental evolutionary changes to take hold and to be productive. Okay, so finally I want to end this lecture with this slide on what makes Agile appropriate and how would you know. If you have a project that is absolutely critical and it cannot fail once it is deployed, then you probably don't want to use Agile. Agile is really more about deploying something incrementally and in an early stage where failures can be not just accepted, but not just tolerated, but accepted. So therefore, a plan-driven approach is very useful in high criticality processes. But frankly, if it's really, really critical, you should be using formal methods. Okay, developer experience. If you have really experienced developers, I think Agile works very well. It is not something that I think you would want a junior developer to come up to speed on without lots of hand-holding, and you would need lots of training to see where they would fit in. So for example, being able to answer those 3 questions in the daily scrum with confidence is not something that a lot of junior developers are going to be able to do. That's also true for formal methods. Formal methods require some training and experience that would be very difficult for somebody just coming out of an undergraduate program. Plan-driven techniques are a little bit more amenable to this. You can have junior developers just starting out as long as you have upper management that is experienced. How does this, if requirements are going to be unstable and they're going to be unstable, Agile is the place for you. If requirements are going to be relatively stable, it's a well-known domain or a product that has already been on the market for a while, then plan-driven techniques are not a bad way of going. Formal methods probably want just limited requirements in general, but certainly the most stable possible scenario, because when an ontology changes, when a formal model changes, there are follow-on effects that have to be sussed out and debugged throughout the system, and it's very difficult to have decoupled requirements in a formal model. Team size. If your team size is really small, Agile is perfect. Much, much better for you. If your team size is really, really large, then you probably want to use some sort of a plan-driven approach. And then formal methods does not really matter which one you have. Team size is kind of irrelevant from a formal methods approach. If you have a chaotic culture, or at least a culture that is less ordered, Agile may be a better fit for you culturally. If you are in a situation where much of the rest of your organization is pretty well regimented and ordered, then plan-driven techniques could work very well for you. If you have a process that absolutely has to have an incredible high level of quality and everybody on the team is committed to extreme quality, then you might want to consider formal methods. It may actually work better for you in that kind of a circumstance. So that's everything I wanted to say about Agile software development. If you have questions, and I know there will be several questions because this is not something that's covered particularly well in the textbook, please come and see me in office hours today or ask by email.